Good afternoon, everybody. We will start the webinar in a minute. We're just waiting for some more attendees. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ahmad Nagar. I am the founder of Emirates Legal Network, and I'm pleased to be moderator of today's webinar. I'm here since 2008, practicing lawyer in Dubai. Since 2013, the managing partner of Nagar and Partners. And in 2020, I founded the legal blog, the UAE Jurist. And since 2021, we started Emirates Legal Network, which is registered as a nonprofit association with ADGM. Currently, is the biggest social group of lawyers in the UAE. I am delighted to welcome you all into this webinar in association with the Lebanon Law Review about various interesting topics like compliance and AML regulations, legal tech and the AI, business opportunities of today in the UAE. I hope you all are doing well and are not so affected by any war or pandemic anywhere in the world, issues happening anywhere, and that is very unforeseen. Thank you very much for joining us today. In case you have any questions during the webinar, please use the question and answer tab on the bottom of the screen to raise them, and we will answer them in the Q&A session in the end. Please note that this session is being recorded, and copies of the presentations will be shared with you after the event. A little word about Emirates Legal Network, which since 2021 have its own WhatsApp group where more than 490 lawyers and legal minds communicate and exchange updates and legal knowledge, and sometimes brainstorm about legal issues on the daily, or it's fair to say 24/7 we are in conversation. We first started and it's not like that. It was not as efficient as today. We tried our best to regulate the conversation, to regulate the admission, and the results actually was very good. Growing from 100 people into almost 500, registering it as a nonprofit. We're working on the website, we have our own bank account, and things are developing as a very, very effective association. Hopefully this grows more and more, and thanks to all of you. I'm actually impressed to see a lot of people are joining. We are above 100 participants already from many countries. Thank you all for joining. Very good. We'll start our first session with Michael Lane. Let me introduce Michael. He's a very good friend of mine, and he's the managing partner of Swiss Group and the president of the Swiss Business Council in the UAE. He's a Swiss lawyer, and is a legal advisor of Swiss Group for many years. And the floor is yours, Michael.
Thank you, Ahmed, for this introduction. Welcome, everyone, also from my side. I have the honor today to talk about the very hot topic at the moment. When we talk about the moment for the last couple of years, compliance, a big term now. I say always a bit like sustainability. It's been thrown out there all over the place and put in context with stuff which has sometimes not much to do with actual compliance. So my task today is a bit to shed light on the topic compliance and AML regulation for the law firms here in the UAE. As a lawyer, I always say, like, when we read the law, the regulation and the guidance in place, it's important to us to know from where this is all coming from. So I will start a bit with the background on AML regulations and guidelines, have a look, just a brief look on what the AML and the counter-terrorist regulation in the UAE looks like. And then the big term introduced by the FATF is the designated non-financial business and professions. That's where we're qualified as lawyers if we fulfill certain requirements. And then last but not least, to narrow it down, what are the obligations and duties of lawyers with respect to AML and compliance here in the UAE. So this is my agenda for my presentation. I will just dig right in. But before I come to my actual presentation, as this is like pretty common now, let's start with a poll to see a bit where you're coming from, your backgrounds, if you're a client-facing lawyer, in-house lawyer, if we have compliance officer on board, last but not least, if we have some MRLOs. Ahmed, if I can ask you to share the poll. So these are two polls actually, or just do the first one for now. What is your function in the company? Are you a client-facing lawyer, legal consultant, an in-house lawyer, a compliance officer, or a money laundering reporting officer? So here, in case you're a client-facing lawyer, but you're also the compliance officer, MRLO, then I ask you to tick the MRLO box. We'll give it another 10 seconds. And Ahmed, if you can close the poll.
Just 2 seconds more, because I see that some other participants are actually giving their voting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so we end the poll right now.
So then when we dig in, when we look at some numbers, it's always interesting to see what is the impact of financial crime. So basically the latest number I could find on the topic date back on the report from 2019. You can see that in 2018, the financial overall crime was up to, now let's discuss this off. Was up to 5.8 trillion US dollars, of which roughly 2/3 were available for laundering. So this corresponded at the time to roughly almost 7% of the global GDP. So this just to have a bit a relation of what financial crime actually means. You see that within just a few years, roughly 8 years, that the size of the financial crime funds involved almost tripled. So you see the tendency is growing. Financial crime becomes a more and more bigger issue. It has greater value today of all the currency which are currently in circulation. And to give a bit comparison, it's larger than the combined GDP of the UK and France. So we see here the impact of financial crime is huge. And of course, a big part of the financial crime, basically the criminal money coming in, the funds were actually available to be laundered and actually be to make clean again. When we talk about AML, the lawyers always like, let's have the basis for this talk. AML refresher, when we look at the AML law here in the UAE, how the definition of a crime of money laundering actually is defined. You can see that it's basically any person having the knowledge. Of course, as a lawyer, we always need to think, do you need to have actual knowledge, or you should have actual knowledge? that's then part of the later talks in this speech, that the funds and the proceeds are a felony or misdemeanor, and who willingly commits one of the following acts. You see, if you have knowledge that the funds are coming from a criminal background, if you're transferring or moving such proceeds or conducting any transaction with the aim of concealing or disguising the illegal source, if you're concealing or disguising the true nature, the source or location of the proceeds, as well as the methods involving of their disposition, movement, ownership, or rights with those proceeds. Third, acquiring, possessing, or using proceeds upon receipt. And last but not least, if you assist, or that person who has the knowledge that the funds are from illegal background, assist the perpetrator to basically escape punishment. So this is the AML refresher, what's stated in the law. So let's have a quick look what the 3 stages of money laundering are. I'm sure you have heard of those, the 3 stages, the first being the placement. This is basically when they're moving the funds from direct association from the crime. So this is the first step. I make one example. One big example is smurfing. If large sums of illegal funds are broken up into smaller pieces, which do not trigger any suspicious transactions with banks, so small portions are deposited into an account as one example. Another example would be paying false invoices. When we go to the second layering, it's all about disguising the trail. So lose the audit trail. One example is moving the funds in the bank account all over the place in different jurisdictions through different companies just to lose or basically blur where the money or the funds are coming from. One big other example now, basically a bit newer, is so-called chain hopping. This is when one convert one cryptocurrency into the other. So you move your funds between cryptocurrency before it's then exchanged again into fiat. And then when we talk about the last stage, integration is when basically making the money available again, that to make it from a legitimate source. One example is you purchase real estate, you sell the real estate, you buy other like big value items, jewelry, art, and luxury goods. I make one other example to have a bit maybe a practical approach. I'm a Swiss lawyer, coming from a Swiss perspective. When you pay taxes during the whole year, you can pay towards your estimate tax liability. And if you constantly overpay this, then in the end, you will have a tax return. And of course, it's very nice if I can show that I received funds back from the tax authority. So in this way, for example, it's easy to basically launder the money. I make another example from a lawyer perspective. You have a client who pays a retainer for an intended legal action. And then in the end, said like, oh no, I did a reassessment. I don't want to pursue with the legal action. He gets the retainer refunded from the law firm. So it's pretty nice that can show that the funds have been returned from the law firm. So just 2 very practical examples how actually such money laundering could be happening. When we look at the big picture, on international picture, AML standards, we all know that the Financial Action Task Force has, on an international level, put out 40 recommendations how to combat money laundering and terrorist financing. There's a broad range of activities undertaken, not only by the financial institution, but also by the non-financial sectors, of course, which is for this webinar more interesting for us. And it covers recommendation how such non-financial sector entities who are involved or could be involved should be regulated. So the relevant non-financial sector, let's call it players or participants, are these termed designated non-financial business and professions, the so-called DNFBPs. The FATF has urged the UAE specifically, so our country, to take immediate action to address the financial crime risks based on its elevated status as a major global financial center and trading hub. We all know that we have an extensive financial, economic, corporate and trade activities. It's a global leader in oil, the diamond, the gold expert. As I said initially, of course, these high valuable commodities could be one tool to be used to launder money. In addition of our, it's of course a geographic location here between so-called high-risk countries on international scale, some of them even being on sanction lists. And last but not least, the setup here in the UAE with the financial and the commercial free zones, which from an international perspective are also considered at least medium risk. So here on international level, we have the Financial Action Task Force, which has put out the 40 recommendations, of which, like the countries around the world, should follow. When we look now on the UAE level, what the steps that have been taken basically to implement, amongst others, these 40 recommendations, basically the core piece of law is the 2018 Anti-Money Laundering and Combating the Financing of Terrorism and Illegal Organization Law. This has, in the meantime, as we know, been amended in 2021. So here again, you can see this is a moving process. It's not something static, but it's all in the end reflecting on the risk assessment on international level, and then subsequently here in the UAE on a national level. Subsequently, the various actors within the country, the regulatory authorities, basically the Ministry of Economy for most of mainland and most of the free zone companies has issued them specific guidance for specific sectors on how they see the risk and how they see to have, want to see how risk is mitigated for real estate agents, for precious metal dealer, for lawyers and auditors. And last but not least, for lawyers, of course, the regulatory authority is the Ministry of Justice, which has on its own terms then also issued a guide for lawyers. Again, the involved authorities here within the country, the Ministry of Economy and the Ministry of Justice, amongst others, they basically have given guidance on how to implement the federal law, which is in place on a federal level. The obligations outlined in the circular and the guidance, as I said before, aims to mitigate the risk for specific sectors. So basically, the government is giving guidance on how they see that the risk can and should be mitigated in each relevant sector. When we look again at the UAE, when you go on the homepage, they say there's a specific page on the Ministry of Economy and also on the central bank, where they have a summary of the AML crimes litigation. That's how it's called. You see here, as I said, the 2018 AML law, which is the cornerstone, which has been implemented in 2021. And then subsequently, like in every other law, there's implementing regulation, which has subsequently been established in 2019 and 2022. But AML, of course, is not only for the core AML laws. Here you can see it also had an impact of beneficial owner procedures, about beneficial owner register, which had to be put in place. Again, a big part of AML is to know or to counter money laundering, is to know who is behind legal entities, behind legal arrangements. So one big part of the AML crime legislation here in the UAE is the subsequent implementation of beneficial owner laws and procedures. Then, of course, wherever you have laws in place, there are also laws and implementing regulations, cabinet decision on penalties if the laws are not being followed. And then last but not least, 2020, what is related to terrorism, terrorist financing, the terrorism list regulation and implementation of the UN Security Council resolution. So you see already when we talk about AML and compliance, we need to see the big pictures because it goes into different areas of the laws and not just on basically the core AML law here in the UAE. So this, again, is the legal background. This is on top level. The legislator who has put the laws in place. Now, when we dig a bit deeper what that means, brought it up already several times, designated non-financial business and professions. On the FATF level, it has been implemented in the law and then subsequently you see it in the implementation regulation to the law. It has been defined on UAE level who these players actually are. You see casinos, of course, here in the UAE, that's at least currently not the case. There's not been a casino yet. Then one big player, when we think about the big real estate hype at the moment, the real estate agents, dealer in precious metals, dealer in precious stones, and now coming back to our profession, the lawyers, notaries, and other independent legal professionals and accountants, and then, of course, trust and company service providers. So why are these players singled out for AML purposes? You see, all these categories, they fall outside the scope of financial institutions, so they're not banks, they're not other institutions on the financial side, regulated entities. These are all basically players in the, let's call it, non-regulated industries, but they all conduct specific financial activities on behalf of clients, which may be then used to obscure the ultimate beneficiaries, or to coming back to the AML laws here, source of funds behind the transaction. So all those players might somehow be involved in, let's call it, a rather risky, from an AML perspective point of view, transaction. Why are they singled out? Because they play a key role in protecting the financial systems. These designated non-financial business and professions are called the gatekeepers, because these are all players in the field which are exposed to tremendous amount of information, and they act sometimes on behalf of their customers in transactions. We look at those transactions are in most cases highly vulnerable to money laundering, terrorist financing risks because of the nature of the product or the services involved. Make some examples here on the slide what these services could look like, which are singled out from an AML risk perspective. We see a lawyer or legal service provider is structuring different legal arrangements for clients, sets up maybe a company, sets up a trust, or in B, a lawyer and accountant may be used as an intermediary for a transaction, for a real estate transaction, for precious metal transactions. Coming back, when we think about the 3 stages of the AML risk or the money laundering, basically here, when we talk about real estate, high value items, which then can be used basically to bring back the illicit funds back into the clean and safe haven. The dealer in precious metal is the same, selling high value items. When you think about this in the layering and integration steps, in the 3rd step again, from the money laundering phases, the corporate service provider, the same as a lawyer, who acts as a formation agent for legal persons, putting a company in place, putting a foundation in place, or even act in a nominee position as a director or as a nominee shareholder to obscure who is actually behind the entity. So these just like a few practical examples to see or to show you why such DNFBPs are called the gatekeeper from an AML and compliance perspective. I said it before, to focus now a bit more on our industry. The Ministry of Justice has in 2021 issued a lawyer's guide on anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism and the financing of illegal organizations. So again, this is basically our regulatory authority who is implementing the laws in place and gives the lawyers guidance on how they see the risk and how the risk should be mitigated. In the implementing regulation to the AML law, you see in Article 3, I just copy-paste, lawyers would fall under such qualification. Of course, not for every service a lawyer is offering or might be offering, but it's specifically singled out if it's involved in purchase and sale of real estate, if it's in management of funds owned by customers, or clients, in the management of bank accounts, saving accounts, or security accounts, when it's working on the organizational contribution for establishment, operational management of companies. So again, if it's nominee structure, acting as director, or in other way involved in company operations, creating, operating, or managing legal persons. So again, if a lawyer sets up a company, or then selling and buying commercial entities. So this is a list of services which can be provided by a lawyer, which then would fall under this guide and the AML laws. Make another example. If a lawyer is drafting a will or is engaged in probate, of course, there's no risk from a money laundering perspective, because if I draft a will for a client, there's no risk from an AML perspective, because it's not about hiding the source of funds or anything else which would fall under the laws here. For example, if a lawyer is engaged in a legal case in court, defending a client, or is supporting the plaintiff in a court case, also this service would not fall under the AML laws here in the UAE. So again, the law and the implementing regulation singles out which kind of services a lawyer might be offering would fall under this law, and then would require specific treatment and specific procedures within the company. Then narrow it really down, taking out of this guide, what are the specific obligations and duties of lawyers acting as such designated non-financial business partners and profession. The first thing is an identification, an assessment, and understanding of the money laundering and terrorism financing risk. Practically speaking, it's the company, the management needs to make a business risk assessment, again, coming with the guidance from the Ministry of Justice, which needs to show a customer-specific risk. I make one example. From a UAE perspective, is the customer a foreigner? Is the customer a client who has a UAE visa? Is the customer an Emirati? Is the customer a corporate entity? Is the customer an individual? So it needs an assessment of the customer and the specific risks. This goes then on with like the associated risk with the product. So which kind of products am I offering as a lawyer? From an AML perspective, of course, if I act as a nominee shareholder, the AML risk is way higher than if I set up a company for a client. Both should be reflected somehow in the money laundering risk assessment, but then again, it's how this risk is evaluated from a company perspective. Products and services which the law firm is offering, the operations, and then delivery channel. Delivery channel is like, how did I get in contact with the client? Was he introduced by a law firm here in the UAE? Was he introduced by a law firm abroad? Was he introduced by a financial institution? Did the client or the potential client just walk into my firm? Do I have face-to-face contact with the client? Have I just had like some Zoom calls? Do I only deal with intermediary? Last but not least, of course, the associated risk with the countries and the jurisdiction involved. Does the client, make an example, who has the UAE visa want to open a fish trading company here in Dubai? Or does the client want to open a precious metal trading company, DMCC, which then deals with maybe African country, which from a geographical risk, of course, is a bit different than if the company would just do business within the UAE or with other jurisdictions which have not been yellow lighted or red lighted. So here you see, starting point is a proper assessment of the company's clients, the company's procedures, the company's products and services, and then where the geographical or the jurisdictional contact points are. So this is basically the starting point, what the law firm needs to do. So in the end, you basically have a low level, a medium, and the high risk metrics. where you need to quantify your potential client, also on an ongoing basis, your client. And this, of course, we know the sanctions list has changed, the risk assessment, the national risk assessment is changing, the various lists on international level. We know the UAE, for example, is now on various blacklists from the European Union and the FAQ. This, of course, is also reflected for other jurisdictions. So this is basically an ongoing process, and is the starting point on how a law firm is conducting is money laundering and terrorist financing risk mitigation. So again, starting point, identification, assessment, and understanding of the company's risks. Of that is, of course, the concept of due diligence measures. We all know when you onboard the client, it's about the KYC, how to get to know your client. And then again, when we look at the points here on my list, of course, if you have a high-risk customer, the KYC and customer due diligence needs to go a bit deeper into the client's information documentation than if you have a low-risk client. So here again, it's always falling back on the first point, identification, assessment, understanding of the risks, which then triggers the due diligence measures taken from the company. So due diligence measure, one is KYC, you ask for a passport, a utility bill, maybe bank statement from the client to see that it makes sense, what he wants to do, a CV to see the operations, that he has the knowledge. And of course, if you go into the high-risk customer, maybe there's also form source of wealth, source of funds, which the client needs to come back to see where the money is coming from. A whole different topic then, of course, is the politically exposed person, so the so-called PEPs, which then requires a more deeper and a different approach from the company's due diligence and compliance checks on the client. Then, of course, last but not least, the high-risk countries, which then most likely also trigger some approval process within the company, which then maybe goes all the way up to the top management if a client should be onboarded from a high-risk country. Saying that, of course, we have a total red flag by sanctioned countries, but if, for whatever reason, a country is considered to be high risk based on the company's own risk assessment, this just triggers different approval approaches within the company, but as such, of course, is not just a no-go. So you see the whole concept on how to approach and do compliance and due diligence within the companies always comes back on the proper first step, identification, assessment, and understanding of the company's risk. Based on that, of course, the establishment of internal policies, controls, and procedures. It's an AML manual. These can be forms, this can be KYC forms, this can be other company setup forms where you see the information you request from the client to know if you set up a company, as an example. So these are basically the manuals in place to make sure that you give the staff and the company as such the proper tools to assess the identified AML and terrorist financing risks. As I said it before, the whole process is, of course, an ongoing monitoring procedure. So it's not just when you onboard the client, but it's a constant checks on compliance, on KYC, on due diligence. The client might move, might switch his residency to a country which is considered high risk from your understanding. Maybe the client is changing his tax residency. Maybe the client does not really do effectively what is on the trade license. So these are all processes which are ongoing. It always comes back to the identification, assessment, understanding of your own risk, which then basically goes along with the whole client journey within your company. Then, of course, if you're a designated non-financial business and profession, then you're obliged by law to engage a compliance officer, and then subsequently an MRLO, which then has to subscribe with the GoAML, meaning that the online platform connected to the financial crime unit in Abu Dhabi, that in case you see a suspicious transaction or a suspicious behavior by one of your clients, you have a responsibility to report. Of course, the timing of reporting is then a topic. And the last but not least, what do you do when you have identified a suspicious transaction, what you do? Because of course, if you tell the client, well, I just did the reporting, I will not work with you anymore, you might be the one tipping off the client. And this, as we have seen also under the AML law, is a crime. This also then falls back on record keeping, which kind of documents and which information need to be kept on record. Together with them, the policies and manuals, of course, it needs appropriate training and awareness raising with staff and management. It does not really help to have the paper in some folder in the office, but your staff needs to be trained and make aware of the identified risks. And of course, as a side note, targeted financial sanction, this is another topic aside from AML. You need to be aware of the national and international sanctions list, not that you serve whatsoever any client who is on any of those lists. So when we go back, you see obligations and duties of lawyers. It starts with a proper assessment for your firm. Identify, assess, and understand the risks for each and every service you provide. A customer-specific risk needs to be put in place, and a geographical assessment. And last but not least, the delivery channels, how you obtain your clients. Again, this is an ongoing assessment, and it needs to be documented, because if the authorities ever want to see that you follow the law and the guidance, you need to be able to show that you have done all those steps. You need to show that you have appropriate and constant risk assessment, and that the board is aware and has identified how he wants to mitigate the risk which are specific to your firm. So this was just a brief overview on the topic AML and compliance matters for lawyers here in the UAE. Again, it starts at the top, international recommendations and standards, which have been brought down into the AML and related laws here on federal level. They have then been implemented by guidance by the regulatory authorities, the Ministry of Economy, the Central Bank, the Ministry of Justice. And now basically it's up to us lawyers to take into account the guidance and do our appropriate assessment on our level, and then subsequently put the tools in place to mitigate those risks. Again, we know AML and compliance is a hot topic at the moment. So any contravention to the guidance and the laws in place will cause heavy fines. So here, again, we are all in the same boat here. We're part of the game. We are players in a very specific fields if we conduct any of those services I mentioned before. And if we do, then we are obliged to follow all this guidance and put the appropriate tools in place. Again, it's not just the paper in some folders or in some office, but it's actually making people aware of the risk and train them how they can mitigate the risk, the AML risk and the terrorist financing risk for your company. As we all know, if you have, let's call it a rotten egg in your basket, it will take over your whole basket, and it can have a heavy impact on your law firm as such. So with this, I close my remarks, and I hand back to Ahmed for any questions which might have come up during my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael. Impressive presentation. It's not my first time to hear you talking, and it's always more assuring that your knowledge is really very helpful. And I'm pretty sure this session, because it's specifically prepared for law firms and for lawyers, this has been helpful for me and for many of the speakers. I tell you, I'm not sure because I don't see the audience, but I got, even during the speech, a few messages from people I know who are actually impressed by the level of knowledge. Thank you very much for the presentation, and I invite everybody to have a look. Michael have his contact details here. You can get in touch with him, and please write down in the your questions in the Q&A tab, and and let me introduce my next speaker, who is Mr. Antoine Kahan, my friend and one of the brightest Lebanese lawyers I've met, one of the most switched on lawyers. And I prepared a few questions, but one of the questions that I will start with, I did not prepare. What is legal tech? How can you define legal tech, Antoine?
Ahmad, thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you everyone for being here. It's amazing to be on this webinar with all of you. Would love to start with maybe a bit more about myself before I go into that question about legal tech and how it's going to change things for all of us. So despite studying in law school, I never actually went into the bar. So me being a lawyer might be a bit debatable, but the idea is we're from the Lebanon Law Review as well as HAQQ. So we're really interested not only in the advancements of legal theory, but also the advancements of legal technology. And for us, we believe that legal technology is really the future. It's the future for the way people are going to practice law, simply because it's the future for how everyone's going to do everything. We've already started to see this. You see all these young children who are not lawyers, who are uneducated perhaps, who have no real work experience or background. They leverage technology to increase their earning potential massively. The same way that they do that, we as lawyers are very much so able to use legal tech to our advantage, not only to cut down on time, cut down on the way we do things to make things shorter, faster, more efficient, but also to unlock much greater possibilities for us in the workforce. A lot of people, especially with the advent of AI, have a feeling that perhaps AI will replace lawyers. They think perhaps AI is going to take over. We will no longer have any way of really practicing law because they're going to draft our contracts, they're going to do everything for us. But I think that really represents a misunderstanding of what the lawyer means to society and what the lawyer really provides to society, and a misunderstanding of what technology and legal tech has to offer. I am of the firm belief that legal technology will actually enable lawyers to practice better, faster, and onboard more and more and more clients, because legal technology is not here to replace lawyers. Legal technology is here to empower lawyers to do better. And we've been seeing this. Of all the legal technology that has been coming out so far, it's all been to empower lawyers, to cut down on time, to take away everything that can be automated. And I think that's really the future, Ahmed. And I would love to know what you think about that.
Well, I cannot agree more. I personally experienced in the beginning of my career and even in my life. My dad is a lawyer. I basically grew up in a law firm, and I've seen since the 80s or the late 80s where he started to introduce computer, or he started to introduce Windows into his work, and then he came up to the legal software that was organizing the cases and the hearings and all of this. And I've seen this happening long ago because of my family background in the legal field as well. I think right now it's more and more mandatory for lawyers to get these skills. And I believe the lawyers who are going to put together the skill set and understand what skills they need for the future. It's not anymore only internet, and it's not anymore being bilingual, and it's not anymore understanding how to use just the basic computer skills to work. But I think the AI is coming, and the lawyers who are not going to be involved or very much aware of this will fall behind. I have another question for you. How does the legal tech in general effectively effectively serve all legal services or legal professionals? How can it be used on the day-to-day business?
That's a great question. That's a great question. So being a lawyer, it's a people's business, right? And that's why I feel like there's no replacing that human interaction. But a lot of being a lawyer is going through paperwork. A lot of being a lawyer is going through things that you do over and over and over and over again. Legal tech has the huge potential to make that disappear. And by legal tech, I mean specifically AI in legal tech. Because you can train a language model to do your work for you, so that instead of spending 5 hours writing that contract or 3 hours drafting that agreement or whatever amount of time it is, it can do it for you in 5 seconds. And then you can spend 5 minutes editing it. And then you can spend another 5 minutes doing it the way you want it to be exactly. But there's another big room for legal tech to really improve the lives of lawyers. And I'm talking not just for small teams, but also for really big teams, for international teams. And that really comes from task management and case management. Because a lot of times, being a lawyer isn't really a solo effort. You know, when you service a client, you might be working with the entire firm on that particular case. You might be collaboratively working towards a single goal or objective, and then you'd have someone who potentially might be the partner on the case, assigning tasks for everyone involved, making sure that they do this and they do that. And so here, legal tech that has a project management focus that can help teams coordinate across time zones, across jurisdictions to achieve a unified goal at the end, has huge potential in really making things much easier for lawyers involved.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. But let me go a little bit into examples. But because we have been speaking a little bit generally, what examples can you tell us? Like what kind of legal? What are the trends, the latest trends in the legal tech? How can law firms, for example, benefit from what's new in the legal tech industry, for example?
Yeah, so really a lawyer's work can be split into two axes, you could call it. It could be split into productivity, as in what you do internally within the firm, within the office. And it could be split into external communications and outreach, right? So client communication, client outreach, business development, etc., etc., etc. These two axes intersect, and legal tech will be plotted along one or the other. So if you look at applications like Lexis Plus AI, that helps with contract automation using AI tools, that is a pure productivity tool. If you look at Thomson Reuters' new AI tool that's going to be similar to Lexis Plus AI, it's also kind of the same, because it's taking new technology, applying it to the legal space, and really increasing each person's productivity and output. You also have other applications that really help lawyers with their client communications. And here, LinkedIn is a huge one. It's not really legal tech, but these sorts of social profiles, these sort of social networks that let a lawyer showcase their talent, showcase their content, their expertise, really help convey the trust and credibility they have over the internet, which results in them having more clients and potentially even a client communications channel for them. Now, I think one of the major advancements in legal tech is going to happen when you combine that with payments. And there's a great company in North America called Clio. And what they do is they offer internal management features with payment, with client communication, all in the same box. It might be more North American or common law focused, so it's not necessarily localized for the UAE, which is why there's room for other applications to come in and join and really fill in that gap with that sort of seamless experience of an ecosystem experience.
That's great. That's great. I mean, building on the last point that you mentioned, how do you see it in the region? I mean, I hear this a lot of the times at the LegalTech. All the examples are coming either from UK or from US, and sometimes from countries like India. Do you see this in this region, like countries like the UAE, Saudi, Egypt, Lebanon, where you are? How do you see this region coping with the legal tech? Are we up to date? Can we just benefit immediately with this, or is it going to take some time?
I think not only do I personally see it, I'm personally working towards that. And this is where I have to introduce HAQQ a bit more. HAQQ is a legal tech company really dedicated to one thing: digitizing the legal profession in the Middle East to the 21st century. Countries like the UAE and Saudi are way more advanced in terms of legal technology and legal capabilities and tech infiltration compared to other Middle Eastern countries like Lebanon, Egypt, Tunis, Jazair, Morocco. And that has to do with the makeup of these countries and how advanced these countries are compared to the rest of the region, the entire GCC, really. So with HAQQ, what we're doing is we're trying to look at what works in the legal tech space, in the traditional legal practices, and we're crafting a virtual office, or better yet, we've crafted already a virtual office that does everything all in one place. And that's kind of the future that I see for the legal tech industry here. I see a legal tech industry that is local, that's built from here by people in the legal industry for people in the legal industry right here. Not just for law firms, also for general counsel, for in-house counsel, for all people working in the legal profession. So do we have a lot to go? Yes, we do have a lot to go, because a lot of the applications existing here just aren't built to the same level that you would expect from a North American tech. But at the same time, it's not much of a gap to close. And right now, with the introduction of AI, the playing field has been leveled, truly leveled, because right now, practically no one has AI. And that's going to change things really, really, really quickly.
That's very interesting. One last question from my side, because this is something I'm always thinking about. I consider myself a very tech savvy. I like technology. I like communication. I like to put things in order, and I feel that any business have to adapt to whatever new trends that is happening. But what worries me a lot is always the cost, and I always think that okay, it's going to cost me a lot to be to paying a membership for this, to have the access for that, and to get the right information or documents or references. I have to invest. I mean, we used to invest in books in the beginning, but now it has to be technology. But it seems to me that still the markets, or whatever the offering in the market right now, is quite expensive to what small boutique law firms or small companies that has 10, 20 employees, and they have one lawyer who has a head of legal department, and he is basically the legal department. And having a technology that is really heavy in cost would not be very effective. What do you think? How do you see the cost affecting the development of the legal tech in the region?
Well, I think numbers don't lie. Clio can cost upwards of $150 per user per month, right? And that is just an abnormal cost for countries like Egypt, where, correct me if I'm wrong, Ahmad, but the average salary for a year is around $300, correct? With inflation going on.
Yeah, I mean, lately that number's probably dropped.
Yeah, so North America, we need to normalize not only the tech, not only the culture, but also the price, okay? And the Middle East is large. It's not just the GCC. The GCC might be a very well-off region of the Middle East, but you also have all of North Africa. You also have the Crescent, the Fertile Crescent, that area, and these countries The lawyers there are numerous. They do need legal technology. And like you said, they can't really afford expensive solutions like Clio. And it makes sense because 75% of lawyers globally practice in small firms, not exceeding 12 lawyers per firm. So do they have the infrastructure to hire people to run these softwares? No, which is why user experience is a bottleneck. And you have so many lawyers in these countries that don't even have an email address. So getting them on board the digitization train is going to be a really long ride. It's going to be a really big marathon because you have to tell them about the internet first. And then after telling them about the internet, you have to tell them, okay, you have the internet, now you have an email, this is what you do, and now there's legal tech. And for a lot of them, for lawyers who are 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, who are from these regions, who don't have this exposure to legal technology or to technology at all, for that matter, it's going to be very difficult for them to change their ways. And not only are they the decision makers, but they're being given legal technology that requires 2 or 3 other people to even maintain. So user experience is a big problem. User experience and pricing are 2 of the main reasons why legal tech hasn't taken off really in this region. And here, I'd want to go back to someone like Simon Sinek. Simon Sinek is, for those who don't know him, he's a great motivational speaker and a business coach and a TEDx speaker. And one of his famous principles is start with why. So when you're doing something, ask yourself, why am I doing this? How am I going to achieve my goals and what am I going to do actually to achieve that? A lot of the reason why companies tend to price gouge is because their why isn't necessarily to digitize lawyers. It's just to make money. So there isn't necessarily a social mission attached to them. Otherwise, they would have lowered their prices for this region, which is what I think makes solutions like HAQQ different from other solutions, in that we are from the region, we understand exactly what lawyers need, and we offer to them at a very affordable price and without the bottleneck of a user experience problem. So price is definitely an issue, but I would also stress on the user experience being a much greater issue.
Thank you so much, Antoine. Thank you so much. I mean, building on this, on this last question, can you read? We have a question from the audience for you. In this room, most of the attendees are lawyers, whether in private practice, in-house lawyers, or professionals who are heavily involved in the legal practice in general. In your opinion, how does legal tech contribute to the efficiency and quality of work provided by legal professionals today? And one more, which is for someone interested in exploring legal tech but unsure where to begin, what resources and strategies would you recommend?
Interesting. So if you want to explore legal tech, I would really look at the top companies involved in this space. I would look at potentially really at this stage, if you're from this region and you want to do legal tech, and I'm going to say this because my goal is to get legal tech out there. I would even encourage you to start your own legal tech company, because at this stage it's so infantile that the more players that are trying to achieve this, the better it is for lawyers everywhere. So I would say that. I would also say look at other industries and how they're benefiting from technology, and try and see how the law and the legal profession could benefit as well. Otherwise, just really good articles could come out, especially from the West. Keep your eyes on the USA because they're the most advanced in terms of legal tech, and that's a great resource to start with. As for the other question, which is, can in-house lawyers and other professionals benefit? Absolutely, yes. Because really, the legal profession is 2 things. It's internal work, which is collaborative, and it's external communications with the client. And you can really combine them into one place. And you can really use legal tech and tech in general to help automate and to help remind you of what you need to do and to help keep your team together whilst maintaining a clean and concise line of communications with all stakeholders involved. So even if you're legal counsel, even if you're a lawyer, or even if you're really just a law student starting out, I would recommend keeping an eye on legal tech and seeing what solutions work best for you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Antoine. Very valuable and enlightening as usual. I enjoyed talking to you about all of this because this is really one of the subjects that is very, very close to my heart. One last comment about LegalTech, and I would probably, since we are talking to a room full of lawyers, few years back, it was possible that you don't speak English and you don't speak, you don't know how to use the internet, or you cannot use a smartphone, and you could be a very, very senior lawyer in your firm. 10 years ago, this was not possible, and this was a very important rule to be able to be employable. I think in the future, lawyers who are not trained for AI and trained for legal tech will not have a space in big law firms, or not being able to generate more leads for their business. So thank you very much, Antoine. With this, I would like to move to our third speaker, Mr. Urs Sternemann, who will be speaking about the business opportunities in UAE, what can be done and what should be done and what shall be not done. I would introduce Mr. Urs as a very, very good friend, old friend, old referring not to his age, only to the time that we know each other. Urs is used to be my boss, and as well for quite a while he's my mentor. And he worked for more than 25 years in various countries in the Middle East, Latin America, in different responsibilities in the financial and legal field. He used to be the CEO of a VP bank in Switzerland, and before that, CEO of VP bank in Caribbean. Since 2004, he's stationed in Dubai, where he mostly served European and also sometimes Russian-speaking countries as an advisor. And now he is he's running the Swiss Academy. And Urs, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Ahmed, for these very kind words. It's always very charming, and the chance to have to participate at such events. Of course, as you can see, I'm a little bit of an older age. I'm from the last century. And nevertheless, I think there are plenty of possibilities here. Since we just were speaking about compliance and AML, just a small reminder. First, of course, I heard about AML. It was not really AML I heard about. I heard about money laundering. There were the first conferences about money laundering in the Caribbean, or in Miami, where I participated in '95. And the conference at that time was called Money Laundering. Then with the time, they realized, well, perhaps it would be better to call it anti-money laundering. At that time, the focus was also in that field completely on to avoid all the drug money. Now, participating at all such conferences, I don't hear anything anymore about drugs. Now, the money laundering compliance goes in all kinds of fields. Drugs is just a side product of it, but it is not so important anymore. But nevertheless, now we see plenty of changes in this world. And what I am very, very happy to be and to experience is here in the UAE, which under their leadership, they are just adapting so quickly to all these changes which come up for all kinds of reasons. Corona, the new technologies which we just discussed, Abraham Accord, and so on, and the new position concerning war situation. All this, of course, makes it an attractive place for many people like you, Ahmed, like me, like many people who see this as a possibility. Because within a few hours flying, we reach a population of 3 billion people. And what I always say to myself is, these business opportunities, we need to take advantage of it. And many international companies move their headquarters to this region. Well, a main reason, what Ahmed said before, English, of course, is important. There's the 9% corporate tax starting, but as far as what I see so far, there's nobody really leaving, because this country is open. 90% of the population of foreigners. Which country is so open to receive people? I'm from Switzerland, where we have about 25% foreigners living there. And we all have a lot of, hey, that's perhaps a little bit too much and so on. But here they are trying to get more know-how in all these different fields of fintech, blockchain, crypto technologies. many things we don't really know what it is. And here I do say to everybody, try to get into these things, try to learn as much as possible. I remember when the VAT was introduced in a few years ago here in the UAE, I told my staff members, look, Ernst & Young, PricewaterhouseCoopers and all these big companies, they know as much as you do about VAT in the UAE. That means they know nothing. That means we are in the same position. So if small companies are also putting all their know-how and try to increase their know-how, they can get into it. And also to become aware of this ChatGPT, as was it mentioned, and to make use of it, use it, no? And I remember in the last century, in the 90s, Microsoft Word was offering translation for letters. It was more or less not working. But now everything is working with translation, and the same thing will be with ChatGPT. This is just a start. If in 10 years it will be a lot more efficient, I think everybody of us should be very, very much aware of it. Many multinationals see, of course, many synergy possibilities, and also the small companies. We are looking at the participants of our conference, of our webinar here. I see that the majority is our small and medium enterprises. And I think we need to be more creative, more open to change and to accept possibilities, and also to be aware. I'm coming from Switzerland, and of course, my main link to new clients were, of course, from my home country, Switzerland. So try to have a certain area where you say, okay, I will concentrate on these areas. And there are many delegations for all such delegations coming from such countries. Go and participate at such meetings with delegations. Become their knowledgeable person of the UAE, of the GCC countries, and help them to get familiar with this. A main advantage, I think, is above all this substance, the substance idea which came up, that companies need to have substance. The idea, I repeat it, I have said that a few times, this comes from Europe, where they were not happy at all that these big American companies, Amazon and Starbucks and so on, make billions of profits and don't pay nearly no tax, because their taxable place was somewhere in the Caribbean or in the Channel Islands. And then they started to say, hey, you need to have substance, you need to have offices with employees in the UAE and so on. And that, of course, or at the place where you are taxable, which of course is a bit difficult in the Cayman or BVI or Panama. I lived in the British Virgin Islands with 30,000 local people and about 500,000 or more companies. It's impossible that those 500,000 companies can have substance. It's just not possible. But thanks God that the UAE, about 4 or 5 years ago, started the open possibility to transfer companies here. And that, of course, is a great opportunity. Get in contact with law firms in the Caribbean. Tell them, hey, I could be your person here in the Middle East, and you could transfer possibilities here. So this is a huge possibility to get clients for your firm. And the UAE definitely is the ideal place, because here everybody is welcome, and you can have real offices for 1 person, for 10 persons, for 100 persons. The management lives very happily here because you don't pay any tax. So plenty of possibilities, and the infrastructure has become top class worldwide, and attract so many people at the high quality of life. With the many schools you have here for the children, makes it very good. And the political stability. Well, in the area here, of course, you always have something popping up in some countries which are not too far away. But with this, you have plenty of possibility to attract people, because here you have political stability and a liberal business environment for all kind of new things. So here, definitely a great chance to attract people. And also with the company migration, main attraction of the company migration is that the bank accounts remain. all of us, we have a one big headache when we set up companies, and the main headache is we need to have a bank account, and to open bank accounts is a very difficult issue here in the UAE. It's difficult in Europe. It's difficult worldwide. And also a major advantage of transferring companies, contracts remain. So you don't have to enter new discussions with your clients to make new contracts. The Israel connection, of course, this is also for people, Arabs, of course, a little bit a tough issue. I lived in Lebanon. I lived in Palestine for several years, so I know the issues quite well. I lived in Hebron, where Abraham was living 3,000 years ago, so I know these issues quite well. I know the big problems, but nevertheless, I do think it's a huge opportunity to learn more about it and to take advantage of it. So many agreements have now been established because of the Abraham Accord, and many UAE companies can be used for that. And with this, I come to the do's and don'ts. All of us, we need to get new clients. I think most of us, how many of you, perhaps, especially if you're in larger law firms, you are just find the solutions for the legal issues. You're not so much involved in finding new clients. Now, perhaps with ChatGPT, perhaps there will be a little bit more pressure on you. Perhaps law firms will say, well, perhaps we don't need that many lawyers working for us. We need, above all, more new clients. That means we need persons who bring us clients. And more, this is now shifted that all the lawyers, all the people in the legal departments, that they also should bring new clients. And also one thing to say, if you acquire a new person, a new client, very often if one day you move to another law firm, the chance that you can move that client with you is also a lot easier than if you just were doing their work for it. It is, of course, saying perhaps, well, to employers or owners of law firm, it's not a very nice news to hear that, but that definitely is an issue. That means for lawyer, you need to have possibilities to acquire new people, to find new opportunities, and to make a close cooperation with your potential new clients. And also to be open to accept new challenges, because you were doing divorces for the last 10 years. It doesn't need to mean that you have to do it for the next 20 years as well. You can open up and new technologies that come, new things, open it and try and say, hey, these are possibilities. The whole thing will also make it more interesting for you. Become an expert in tax. Now the tax of 9% is introduced. I say the same thing as with VAT. Nobody knows exactly how it will work here. Your knowledge is about on the level as top advisors of KPMG, PwC, who get perhaps 5 or 10 times the salary you have. But if you now concentrate, participate in all kind of webinars, courses, and so on, your knowledge will increase. There are plenty of people all over the world who have their UAE company. There are 100,000 of UAE companies here. They have no idea what will happen. If you can now go to them and say, hey, I can advise you, we can help you. We can help you with the company migration. We can also help you in crypto blockchain matters. Then definitely this is a big, big advantage for you. And one thing, it should be the communication with you should be easy. So you should be easy to be reached. And one also thing, communications to be easy. With this, I mean also when you speak, of course, you should speak in English. And of course, you have an accent, or many of you have an accent like me. You hear I'm from Switzerland or somewhere from Europe. Okay, that of course is difficult to erase completely, but be aware, most of us, English is not their mother tongue. So speak a little bit slower and avoid abbreviations. I sometimes participate in conversations and all kind of abbreviations are used left and right. I have no idea what it means. And I don't dare to ask them what it means because I perhaps could give the impression I'm stupid, so I don't do it. But try to avoid it. Always when I speak with people, I say, DIFC, Dubai International Financial Center, ADGM, the Abu Dhabi Global Market. I always mention it again without always implying, oh, the persons, of course, know about it. And then concerning networking techniques, try to speak with everybody at events. We spend so much money, your employer or yourself, you're going to events of business councils, of the Emirates Legal Network, and there are plenty of people, 50, 100, 500 people participating. Now, I recommend, my first knowing about networking was, if you go in a room, let's say of 100 people, in there, I'm sure there's 1 or 2 or 3 persons who have something which could be very interesting for you. Perhaps they have a business for you. Perhaps they know your wife. Perhaps their kids go to school with your kids or something interesting. But how do you find that person? That means you have to speak with everybody there. Don't get chucked that you just stay together with your friends. Meet new people. When I told my staff members to go to networking events, I always told them, it's forbidden for you to stay together. You have to separate, you go to that corner, start to mingle with as many people and speak with as many people as possible, so that you get to know about their background and to see whether there's some potential. And an important thing is as well, don't sit down. If you sit down, you will know everything about the person next to you. You will know the name of his grandmother. But will that help so much? Well, perhaps if you just sit next to Bill Gates, well, then perhaps I would continue sitting next to him. But in most cases, I would rather prefer walk the room, mingle. And that, of course, means also you need to have a certain interest in the people, to be interested in knowing more about the thing. Show an interest to them. When you get their business card, look at the business card and try it and study it and see what it is. And not just put it away, and prepare also a good elevator speech so that when they say, hey, what the heck are you doing here? Don't say, I'm a consultant. I hear that so often. People tell me, oh, I'm a consultant. Well, that's very interesting. Consultant in what? In giving advice how to repair an elevator? A consultant in the kitchen somewhere? So give an elevator speech where you inform, for example, me, as when I had a law firm, I said, yeah, well, I have a law firm. We have quite a few staff members. We are specialized in setting up companies with local partners in free zones, as offshore setups. We also do this and that and so on. So I have a bit of an elevator speech. And very important also, make follow-ups. Follow up, as I created that already when I came here, because I know here it takes a long time till you get your clients. Really, 30 years ago, I was with now quite a famous bank with Credit Suisse. Well, I don't know how long it will be, Credit Suisse still, but nevertheless, I was with Credit Suisse in Bahrain, looking after Saudi Arabia and Bahrain. When I called somebody, everybody said, oh, yes, of course, come over, let's talk, let's have coffee. In the first meeting, they already signed all the application forms. And a month later, I passed again and said, okay, well, after 1 hour talking about Saddam, who just occupied Kuwait, I told them, okay, now how is it with that fixed deposit? Wasn't transferred. They said, oh, I'm so sorry. My secretary made a mistake. She renewed it with UBS instead of transferring it to us. Then afterwards, I went again, before the renewal of the fixed deposit, again 1 hour about Saddam and Kuwait. And then I brought up again the topic of the account. And then I say, hey, don't you know, Ramadan starts tomorrow. And then the daughter got married, the grandma died. Always there was an issue. In general, 30 years ago, it took me 10 meetings to get the money, which was promised to me already in the first meeting. That shows how nice the people here are. They never say no. They never say, oh, I'm not interested. You don't need to visit me anymore. And that is a little bit an issue. And something as well in all these meetings, most probably you will promise something and you will do it. You say, oh, I will send you tomorrow the statement. Do it. And forget those problems which are very commonly used here in this area to say, no problem, don't worry, everything will be good. When I hear that word, I already know there will be problems and I definitely have a reason to worry. So forget using these words, just solve the issues and do what you promised, and then I'm sure you will be quite successful. Concerning business cards, well, there is now a new trend, which is using electronic business cards. And for me, electronic business cards, they are like Bermuda triangles, impossible to find anything again. If something is on my mobile phone where I have 10,000 contacts, it's downloaded, and sometimes it takes about 5 minutes till we find the right way how to do it. And then it is somewhere in there. How the heck do I remember and find that person again? For me, it's impossible. For me, it's a Bermuda triangle. Therefore, try to invest some money, 1 cent for a business card so you can hand it over. We have all kind of bizarre names. My name is Urs Stirnimann. Now, who of you can repeat that name? Most probably all have difficulties, and definitely you cannot write it. So have a business card, but the name is on it, your profession, and the details of it. This makes it more interesting. In the evening, I usually write down the date when I met this person, the nationality, so that I have a little bit an idea, and also approximately how old the person is, so that I all put this afterwards in an electronic system. So if I meet that person in 2-3 years ago, and I see, oh, I met that person, and I can continue it. Use as well a readable font so that you can read it, and don't use color. Avoid a black background or cards like this, where very small print, where it's very difficult to read it. Try to avoid this. Make it readable so that it's easy to read. And if you just have a mobile number on it, for me, this is a clear indication this must be a one lady or one man show. If possible, have a landline on it and a full address, so you see the address, not just the PO box or no address at all. Full address, that is important. And also, as I mentioned, don't avoid black background, have a white or a color of the card where you can write on it, because I usually write some messages on the card. I think these are very important things. Then I also, since we talk about compliance and AML, I also would like to bring up the word cookies. You know, now everywhere there are cookies. Everywhere, if you go into a website, you have to accept the cookies, or you have to go to a very complicated procedure. Now, more or less everybody accepts the cookies. I don't know if anybody of you ever read these cookies. If you really want to read a full text of a cookie, well, you will need a whole weekend till you are gone through it. And they usually start with a saying like, data protection is important to us. And then you know it. That's exactly the opposite, because with accepting the cookies, you open the possibility that they can get all kind of information from you and from your computer without you really knowing it. And also be aware that WhatsApp has access to all your contacts. If I tell this to people, they usually say, yeah, no problem. But they're not really aware what it means. I found out what it really means when about 5 years ago, I started using WhatsApp only 5 years ago, and I was very reluctant to start using it because I didn't want that all my clients suddenly are in that WhatsApp. And then my son convinced me, and I had only 10 contacts on this special separate phone. And then I had 10 contacts in it, and I got in contact with my son, and all my contacts that just had phone number, address, the name, but no photos. And suddenly 3 of those 10 people had photos. And I wondered, where the heck did those photos come from? Till I understood and read a little bit, all my contacts went up to the WhatsApp server. The contacts of my son were up there in the WhatsApp server, and they compared them. And then they saw, 3 contacts are the same, but the one I have, the photo is missing. So they just handed them over the photos into my one as well. Whether they did changes to the phone numbers, to the address and so on, I'm not aware of it, because that is more difficult to have a contact of it. So therefore, please be aware that WhatsApp has access to all your contacts which you have on the phone. So if you have 5,000 contacts, those contacts are up in the WhatsApp server. Be open for change. For example, me, I had the luck and I was willing to have a lot of different jobs in my life. I started, believe it or not, as diving instructor in 4 continents. It was very interesting. I was in Africa, I was in the Middle East, I was in Europe, I was in Latin America, North America, very great place. Then I became a lawyer. And then I joined the Red Cross as a delegate in wars, visiting prisoners of war in 2 continents. Also very interesting experience to see that what happens in a war. I was in Lebanon, I was in El Salvador during their civil war and when they were occupied by Israel. I was professor at universities in Latin America. Then I became a banker. I was a banker in the Middle East. I was in Europe, in the Caribbean, in South America. I was a diplomat for a short while with the Swiss government in Palestine. And now I had a training institute. And all this, people say, wow, that's great. And this is all, wow, big chances you had. But the main difference was I was able and I was ready to accept something which came up. All these positions, I started always from scratch. It wasn't on one level and then a higher level and I went up. No, I started from scratch and it was all a great thing to do. So I think for you, there are great opportunities around. For me, of course, being in the retirement league, it's easier to talk about it because I have passed all these things. But for you, I think it's such a great opportunity. You are here in Dubai where the leadership is so great in making opportunities for you that you can reach a region of 3 billion people in all kind of new technology. And there's Dubai, the UAE is neutral with all these different issues in the world, makes it great. And it is also a great place for retirement. Therefore, for me, I definitely will continue staying here. It's also a reason so that I can see a little bit what Ahmed is doing, whether he's doing it the way I told him to do it. So that definitely is always fun. And I'm sure Ahmed will prepare something so that we will have a next conference, perhaps in person, a webinar of the Emirates Legal Network. So I'm definitely looking forward to see you, all of you. Okay, with this, I hand over to Ahmed.
Thank you. Thank you, Urs, so much. It's always an inspiration and very valuable. I've said this to you personally and to many people who, whenever I introduce you, very inspiring speech. And actually, the business opportunities mentioned in your speech today are already brought me some ideas to enhance my business and the way I will network next time, because despite what you told me many, many years ago, I still forget and I spend too much time during networking events with my friends. Next one, I will not speak or stand next to anyone I know, and I will get to know more people. Thanks a lot. And I see a lot of questions. Urs, do you have time? Maybe we can answer one question. Could you please inform us if listing UAE on FATF blacklist effectively obstruct the access of UAE-based companies to US and European markets?
Well, that is definitely an issue, especially for transfers. If you make transfers and perhaps you have contacts with bankers or in Europe or with clients of Europe, they want to make transfers to the UAE, to banks in the UAE, in Dubai, they have difficulties. Sometimes they cannot do it, or there are plenty of questions. Why do you make a transfer to Dubai? What is this? Why do you send $2 million to Dubai? Do you really want to buy an apartment? And where is this apartment? All kinds of questions in this respect are coming up. So definitely this is a disadvantage, and definitely will be helpful if the UAE can get off these EU blacklists and FATF blacklists and whatever blacklists exist.
Great. We have one more question. Could you please explain more how the UAE business substance requirement and advantages comparing to other low tax jurisdictions?
Well, the main advantage is, okay, you are, for example, your company is in the Caribbean. Very difficult to have an office, to have employees, very difficult. So you think, okay, I will move somewhere else. Now, there are not that many places open where you can transfer companies to, that they're willing to receive them, and that you can have foreigners working for it. Here in the UAE, all you fulfill that all. Everybody is welcome. You can transfer many companies from such offshore jurisdictions. You can have employees here. The management can live here. The management doesn't pay personal income tax. So that's many, many advantages. For example, investment funds, which are many in the Cayman Islands, when they've asked for substance, it's very difficult for them to show that they have any substance in the Cayman Islands, but they can move them to Dubai, to the DIFC. And then what they also can show is for the management of these funds is most probably in London. Half the salary of $500,000, half of it is going to the UAE, not the UAE, but the UK government in the form of tax. Now, if they move to Dubai and they suddenly say, well, I have the same salary as before, but I don't have to pay tax on it. An additional advantage is very often, for example, families move to one place. They move to Switzerland, the husband or the wife is working, but the other partner is not working because it's difficult to find them a job. If you move to the UAE, I always say everybody can find a job here. The salary perhaps is not the salary you expect, but at least you have a job. For example, especially now in real estate, anybody can enter the real estate business. Perhaps you make only 100 dirham a month, but perhaps you make 1 million dirham a month. So that is quite a good thing. And it's also motivating so that if your partner has spent 2, 3, 4, 5 years in Dubai, in their CV, they don't have to write, well, I was not doing anything. I stayed home and I had so many coffees with my friends, that they can say, no, I was in real estate. I was an advisor in something. I had my own company or something. All this, of course, is a very good thing. So if you go afterwards to a country where it is where you have the possibilities to work in your original profession again, all these are plenty of advantages.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much, Urs. Very valuable as usual. I invite all the attendees to connect with the speakers if you wish, because we will share the slides or have the contact details. Urs of the Swiss Academy, thank you so much. Antoine Canaan is the founder of HAQQ, which is a legal tech solution, and the editor-in-chief of Lebanon Law Review. Michael Lane with an amazing presentation about compliance. He is the managing partner of Swiss Group. Thanks to Lebanon Law Review for being very instrumental and helpful to make this webinar happen. Thank you very much for Emirates Legal Network members for attending and encouraging this step. We advise you to please get in contact with the speakers, send us more questions online, and be with us on our next webinar. We'll have also some interesting topics and as valuable speakers, I hope. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.